The envelope sat innocuously on Henry's desk, its crisp white edges a stark contrast against the polished mahogany surface. I reached for it, my fingers trembling slightly, an inexplicable sense of dread coiling in my stomach. As I slid the letter out, the unmistakable scent of a woman's perfume wafted up, a sickly sweet aroma that made my head spin. "Ruth, darling, what are you doing?" Henry's voice startled me, and I whirled around, the letter clutched in my hand like a damning piece of evidence. "Who is Mary?" I demanded, my voice quivering with a mixture of anger and disbelief. Henry's face paled, and he stumbled back, clutching his chest. "Where did you find that?" he gasped, his eyes wide with panic. I thrust the letter towards him, the words tumbling out in a rush. "In your desk drawer, along with a dozen others. Love letters, Henry? From a woman half your age?" He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Instead, he doubled over, his face contorted in pain. "Ruth, you have to call an ambulance," he choked out, his fingers digging into the fabric of his shirt. I stared at him, my heart pounding in my ears, a lifetime of resentment and hurt bubbling to the surface. "No, Henry," I said, my voice steady and cold. "You can manage alone, just like you always wanted." His eyes widened in shock, and he reached out a trembling hand towards me. "Ruth, please." But I had already turned away, the letter crumpled in my fist. I strode out of the study, my footsteps echoing in the cavernous silence of our once perfect home. In the kitchen, I poured myself up a glass of wine, my hands shaking so violently that I nearly dropped the bottle. I sank into a chair, the cool liquid a welcome balm against the burning rage that consumed me. How could he? After everything we'd been through, after all the sacrifices I'd made for him, for our marriage? I thought back to the early days, when his charm and intellect had swept me off my feet. I was a passionate literature teacher then, my life brimming with purpose and dreams. Henry had seemed like the perfect partner, someone who understood and appreciated my love for the arts. We'd spent countless evenings discussing poetry and philosophy, our minds and souls intertwined in a beautiful dance of shared passions. But slowly, imperceptibly, the dynamic had shifted. Henry's ambition had taken precedence, and he'd insisted that I give up my teaching job to support his career. At first, I'd acquiesced, convinced that it was a temporary sacrifice for the greater good of our partnership. How naive I'd been. The years had slipped by, and I'd found myself increasingly isolated, my dreams and aspirations withering away like neglected flowers. Henry's control had tightened, his criticisms and belittling remarks chipping away at my self-worth until I was little more than a shell of my former self. And now this ultimate betrayal. I drained the glass, the wine leaving a bitter aftertaste in my mouth. Enough was enough. I would not be a victim any longer, a mere footnote in the story of Henry's life. It was time to reclaim my narrative, to write a new chapter where I was the author, the master of my own destiny. I squared my shoulders, a newfound resolve coursing through my veins. The road ahead would be long and arduous, but for the first time in decades I felt alive, a spark of hope igniting within me. Henry could keep his mistress and his lies. I was done playing the role of the dutiful, subservient wife. It was time for Ruth Parker to take center stage. I sank deeper into the plush armchair, cradling the glass of wine like a lifeline as memories flooded my mind. How had it all gone so wrong? The first time I laid eyes on Henry, it was at a community theater production of Shakespeare's Hamlet. I was captivated by his commanding presence on stage, his rich baritone voice resonating through the auditorium. After the show, a group of us had gathered at a local cafe to discuss the performance, and that's when I met him. He was charming, intelligent, and seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts on the play. We debated the nuances of Hamlet's character, our words dancing in a delightful tango of intellectual discourse. By the end of the evening, I was smitten. Our courtship was a whirlwind of shared passions and dreams. Henry was pursuing his law degree, and I was a dedicated literature teacher, pouring my heart into shaping young minds. We were kindred spirits, united in our love for the arts and our ambitions. On our wedding day, I remember standing before him, my heart swelling with joy and hope for the future we would build together. His vows promised a partnership of equals, a commitment to supporting each other's aspirations and nurturing our individual growth. Those first few years were blissful. We attended poetry readings and art exhibitions, our conversations flowing like a gentle stream, nourishing our souls. Henry was attentive and supportive, and I basked in the warmth of his affection. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the tides began to shift. Henry's career took precedence, and he insisted that I leave my teaching job to focus on supporting his ambitions. At first, I acquiesced, convinced that it was a temporary sacrifice for the greater good of our partnership. "It won't be forever, my love," he had assured me, his eyes shining with ambition. "Once I've established myself, you can pursue your passions again." Foolishly, I believed him. The years trickled by, and my dreams withered like neglected flowers. Henry's control over our lives tightened, his criticisms and belittling remarks chipping away at my self-worth. I became a shadow of my former self, a mere accessory to his success. Whenever I broached the subject of returning to teaching, he would dismiss me with a wave of his hand. "You know how demanding my career is, Ruth. We can't afford any distractions right now." And so I remained trapped, my once vibrant spirit slowly suffocating under the weight of his dominance. It wasn't until Edna, Henry's mother, fell ill that I glimpsed a glimmer of hope. Henry insisted that we move into her home to care for her, and I reluctantly agreed, desperate for any change in my stagnant existence. Edna was a formidable woman, her sharp tongue and critical nature a constant source of tension. But as the months wore on, something unexpected happened. Beneath her prickly exterior, she began to see the genuine kindness and patience I exhibited, qualities that her son seemed to have forgotten. In those rare moments when Henry was absent, Edna and I would share quiet conversations, and a tentative bond formed between us. She saw the toll Henry's neglect and control had taken on me, and her eyes would soften with a mixture of pity and understanding. "You deserve better, my dear," she whispered to me one evening, her frail hands squeezing mine. "Don't let him break your spirit." Her words were like a lifeline, a reminder of the woman I once was, the woman I still longed to be, and then, just like that, she was gone. Edna's passing should have been a relief, a chance to breathe after months of grueling caregiving, but instead it only served to magnify the gaping chasm that had formed between Henry and me. In the aftermath of her death, I found myself adrift, untethered from the fragile bond that had kept me anchored to our crumbling marriage. Henry retreated further into his work, his absence both physical and emotional, leaving me to navigate the turbulent waters alone. It was during this time that the true extent of his control over my life became glaringly apparent. Without Edna's presence, I was left with nothing but the suffocating silence of our once vibrant home, a constant reminder of the dreams I had sacrificed. "Ruth, you know I can't be bothered with trivial matters," Henry would snap whenever I broached the subject of my desires. "My career demands my full attention." His words cut deeper than any knife, stripping away what little self-worth I had left. I was nothing more than a burden, an afterthought in his relentless pursuit of success. Finances were another weapon in his arsenal of dominance. Henry had insisted on handling all our accounts, citing his superior financial acumen as justification. I was left with a meager allowance, just enough to cover basic necessities, while he indulged in extravagances without a second thought. "A woman of your age has no need for such frivolities," he would scoff whenever I expressed a desire for something beyond the bare essentials. His words stung, but I had learned to swallow my pride, to bury my dreams beneath the weight of his contempt. It was during one of our rare evenings together that the final blow came. I had mustered the courage to suggest taking a part-time teaching position at the local community college, a tentative step towards reclaiming a piece of my former self. Henry's reaction was swift and brutal. "Absolutely not," he thundered, his eyes narrowing into slits. "I will not have my wife gallivanting about like some common laborer." I recoiled as if struck, my heart shattering into a million pieces. "But Henry, it's just a few classes," I pleaded, my voice trembling. "It would mean so much to me." He slammed his fist on the table, the force of it rattling the dishes. "Enough! You will do as I say, or there will be consequences." In that moment I saw him for what he truly was, a tyrant, a man so consumed by his own ego that he would crush the very soul of the woman he claimed to love. As he stormed out of the room, I sank to the floor, my body racked with silent sobs. How had I allowed myself to become so diminished, so utterly powerless? It was then that I stumbled upon Edna's letter, tucked away in a drawer, her elegant script a stark contrast to the harsh reality of my life. "My dearest Ruth," it began, "if you are reading this, it means I have departed this world, leaving you to navigate the treacherous waters of my son's selfishness alone." I clutched the letter tightly, my eyes devouring each word as if it were a lifeline. "Henry has become a man I scarcely recognize, consumed by his own ambition and blinded to the beauty and strength that resides within you. You deserve so much more than the gilded cage he has constructed around your spirit." Tears streamed down my face as I read on, Edna's words resonating deep within my soul. "Do not let him break you, my dear. Find the courage to spread your wings and soar, for you were meant for so much more than this half-life of servitude." As I reached the end of the letter, a newfound resolve took root within me. Edna had seen the truth, had recognized the injustice of my situation, and in her final act she had given me the gift of validation. I was not the problem, Henry was, and in that moment I made a vow to myself. No longer would I be a prisoner in my own life. It was time to reclaim my identity, to shed the shackles of Henry's control and embrace the freedom that had been denied to me for far too long. The path ahead would be fraught with challenges, but for the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope ignite within me. I was done being a spectator in my own story. It was time to take center stage. The news of Edna's illness hit like a ton of bricks. Henry's domineering mother had always been a formidable presence in our lives, her sharp tongue and critical nature a constant source of tension. "We'll have to move in with her," Henry announced one evening, his tone leaving no room for discussion. "She'll need round-the-clock care, and I can't be bothered with hiring nurses." I opened my mouth to protest, but the words died on my lips. Henry's mind was made up, as it always was, and my opinion held no weight. Within a matter of weeks, we had packed up our lives and relocated to Edna's sprawling home on the outskirts of town. The atmosphere was suffocating, a constant reminder of the sacrifices I had made for this family. Edna's health was rapidly declining, and the burden of her care fell squarely on my shoulders. Henry was rarely present, his work taking precedence over everything else, as usual. "You knew what you were signing up for when you married my son," Edna would sneer, her eyes boring into me with a mixture of disdain and pity. I would bite my tongue, swallowing the retort that threatened to spill forth. What good would it do to argue with this bitter, ailing woman? The days blurred together in a haze of medication schedules, meal preparations, and endless cleaning. Edna was a demanding patient, her sharp tongue lashing out at the slightest perceived misstep. "Honestly, Ruth, can't you do anything right?" she would snap, her bony fingers gripping my arm with surprising strength. I would force a smile, my jaw clenched so tightly that it ached. "Of course, Edna. I'll do better next time." But there was no pleasing her, no respite from her constant criticism. Even Henry's rare visits did little to alleviate the tension, as he would simply nod along with his mother's complaints, his eyes averted from mine. It was during one of those interminable nights, as I sat by Edna's bedside, that something unexpected happened. Her usual acerbic demeanor had softened, her eyes taking on a faraway look. "You know, Ruth," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper, "you remind me of myself when I was younger." I stared at her, taken aback by the rare glimpse of vulnerability she was displaying. "I had dreams, too," she continued, her gaze fixed on some distant point. "But I let them slip away bit by bit until there was nothing left but bitterness and regret." A lump formed in my throat as I listened, her words striking a chord deep within me. "Don't make the same mistake I did, dear," she said, her frail hand reaching out to grasp mine. "Don't let my son break you." In that moment, I saw the woman she once was, the vibrant spirit that had been slowly crushed by the weight of her own choices. And in her eyes, I saw a glimmer of understanding, a recognition of the path I was treading. From that day on, something shifted between us. Edna's barbs lost their sting, and a tentative bond began to form. She would share stories of her youth, her dreams of becoming a painter, and I would listen with rapt attention, clinging to the hope that it wasn't too late for me. Edna's passing, when it finally came, was both a relief and a source of profound sadness. As I held her hand in those final moments, her eyes met mine, and I saw a silent plea, a plea for me to find the strength she had lost. In the aftermath of her death, I found myself adrift, untethered from the fragile connection that had kept me grounded. But Edna's words echoed in my mind, a constant reminder that I had a choice to make. I could continue down this path of subjugation, allowing Henry's dominance to strip away the last vestiges of my identity. Or I could heed Edna's warning and reclaim the life that had been denied to me for far too long. The decision, when it came, was surprisingly easy. I was done being a prisoner in my own story. It was time to take the pen and write a new chapter, one where I was the author, the master of my own destiny. The months that followed Edna's passing were a blur of exhaustion and emotional turmoil. The bond we had forged in her final days had awakened something within me, a glimmer of hope that I could reclaim the life I had sacrificed for Henry's ambitions. But as the days trickled by, that hope began to wane, crushed beneath the weight of Henry's indifference and my own mounting despair. "Ruth, I don't understand why you're making such a fuss," he would say, his voice dripping with condescension. "Mother's affairs are settled and we can finally move on with our lives." Move on? As if the past 6 months of grueling caregiving, of bearing the brunt of Edna's demands while he remained absent, meant nothing. "Henry, I need your support," I pleaded one evening, my voice trembling with exhaustion. "I can't keep doing this alone," he scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "Don't be ridiculous. You've managed just fine without me." His words cut like a knife, reopening the wounds of neglect and belittlement that had festered for years. I clenched my fists, struggling to maintain my composure in the face of his callous disregard. "I'm your wife, Henry," I said, my voice low and trembling with barely contained rage. "Not your servant, not your mother's caretaker, your partner." He met my gaze, his eyes cold and unyielding. "And I'm your husband, Ruth. It's your duty to support me, no matter the sacrifices required." That was the breaking point. Years of suppressed anger and resentment came crashing down, a tidal of emotion that I could no longer contain. Duty? I spat, my hands balling into fists at my sides. "Is that what you call this miserable existence? A life of servitude, stripped of my dreams, my passions, my very identity?" Henry recoiled, taken aback by the fury in my voice. "Ruth, you're being hysterical. Calm down and listen to reason." "Reason?" I laughed bitterly. "What reason could possibly justify the way you've treated me, the way you've crushed my spirit beneath the weight of your ambition?" His jaw clenched, and for a moment I thought he might strike me. But then his expression shifted, a flicker of something akin to fear passing across his features. "You ungrateful wretch," he hissed. "After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me?" I met his gaze unflinchingly, my resolve hardening with each passing second. "No, Henry. It's you who have taken everything from me piece by piece until there was nothing left but a hollow shell." He opened his mouth to respond, but I held up a hand, silencing him. "Enough. I'm done, Henry. Done with your lies, your manipulation, your utter disregard for my happiness." His eyes widened as I reached into the drawer of the end table, withdrawing the letter Edna had left me, the letter that had ignited the spark of rebellion within me. "Your own mother saw the truth," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of sadness and determination. "She knew the pain you inflicted upon me, and in her final act she urged me to find the strength to break free." Henry's face drained of color as I brandished the letter, the damning evidence of his mother's betrayal. "Ruth, please," he stammered, his usual arrogance replaced by a desperate pleading. "We can work through this. I'll change, I promise." But his words rang hollow, a feeble attempt to cling to the control he had wielded for so long. I shook my head, my resolve unwavering. "No, Henry, it's too late for promises. I'm leaving, and this time it's for good." As I turned and walked away, my heart pounded with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years I felt alive, a fire burning within me that no amount of oppression could extinguish. I was free, and nothing, not Henry, not the ghosts of my past, would ever chain me again. The days following my declaration of independence were a whirlwind of activity. I had spent too long trapped in the gilded cage of Henry's making, and now that the door was open, I was determined to seize every opportunity for freedom. First on the agenda was securing my financial independence. For years, Henry had kept a tight grip on our finances, doling out meager allowances while indulging in extravagances without a second thought. But Edna's letter had included a surprising revelation. a sizable inheritance that she had left solely in my name. "Use it wisely, my dear," her elegant script had urged. "Build the life you deserve, free from the shackles of my son's control." With those funds, I was able to retain a fierce divorce attorney, a woman whose steely resolve matched my own. Together, we crafted an airtight case, documenting Henry's emotional abuse and financial manipulation with meticulous detail. Henry, of course, was livid when he discovered my intentions. "You ungrateful shrew," he spat, his face contorted with rage. "After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me?" I met his gaze unflinchingly, my resolve unwavering. "No, Henry. This is me reclaiming the life you stole from me, piece by piece." His eyes widened as I produced the divorce papers, the stark reality of my determination finally sinking in. "You can't be serious," he stammered, his usual arrogance replaced by a desperate pleading. "Ruth, please, we can work through this." But his words fell on deaf ears. I had heard enough empty promises, enough lies disguised as concern. This time, I held all the power, and I intended to wield it without mercy. "It's over, Henry," I said, my voice steady and resolute. "Sign the papers, or I'll have no choice but to take this to court." His jaw clenched, and for a moment I thought he might refuse. But then, something shifted in his expression. A flicker of fear, a realization that his control over me had finally shattered. With trembling hands, he reached for the pen and scrawled his signature across the dotted line, sealing his fate and my freedom in a single stroke. As I turned to leave, a sudden commotion behind me made me pause. Henry had collapsed, clutching his chest and gasping for air. "Ruth, you have to call an ambulance," he choked out, his eyes wide with panic. I should have felt pity, remorse, something akin to the concern a wife should have for her ailing husband. But as I looked down at him, all I felt was a profound sense of detachment, a realization that this man had forfeited any claim to my compassion long ago. "No, Henry," I said, my voice calm and unwavering. "I don't have to do anything for you anymore." His eyes widened in shock, but I had already turned away, the weight of his pleas sliding off me like water off a duck's back. As I strode out of the house, my head held high, I felt a surge of exhilaration coursing through my veins. This was it. The moment I had dreamed of for so long, the moment when I finally broke free from the shackles of Henry's control. In that instant, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, I would face them with the strength and resilience that had been forged in the fires of my oppression. Henry's reign was over, and a new chapter in my life was just beginning. I was free, and nothing, not Henry, not the ghosts of my past, would ever chain me again. The days following my confrontation with Henry were a blur of activity, fueled by a newfound sense of determination and purpose. I had spent far too long trapped in the gilded cage of his making, and now that the door was open, I was determined to seize every opportunity for freedom. My first order of business was to seek refuge with the one person I knew I could count on, my sister Joyce. She had been a constant source of support throughout the years, offering a sympathetic ear and a shoulder to lean on whenever Henry's cruelty became too much to bear. When I showed up on her doorstep, suitcase in hand, she took one look at my face and ushered me inside without a word. Joyce had always been perceptive, able to read the depths of my emotions with a single glance. "It's over, Joyce," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of relief and trepidation. "I left him." Her eyes widened, and then she pulled me into a fierce embrace, her arms enveloping me with a warmth and acceptance that I had been denied for far too long. "Oh, Ruth," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion, "I'm so proud of you." In that moment, the floodgates opened, and years of pent-up pain and anguish came pouring out. I clung to Joyce, my body racked with sobs as I purged the toxicity that had been slowly poisoning my soul. Through it all, she held me, her strength and unwavering support a lifeline that kept me tethered to reality. In the days that followed, Joyce became my rock, my anchor in the storm of emotions that threatened to overwhelm me. She helped me navigate the legal intricacies of the divorce, ensuring that every step was taken to secure my independence and protect me from Henry's retaliation. And when the nightmares came, as they inevitably did, she was there, holding my hand and reminding me of the strength that had carried me this far. "You are a survivor, Ruth," she would say, her eyes shining with a fierce pride. "Never forget that." With Joyce's encouragement, I began to take tentative steps towards reclaiming the life that had been denied to me for so long. I sought out old friends, rekindling connections that had been severed by Henry's isolating grip. Their warm embraces and words of support were like balm to my wounded soul, reminding me that I was not alone in this journey. And slowly, bit by bit, the pieces of my shattered identity began to reform, like a delicate mosaic pieced together with care and determination. It was during this time that I received the news of Henry's hospitalization. Part of me felt a twinge of guilt, a lingering remnant of the dutiful wife I had been conditioned to be. But that fleeting moment of weakness was quickly overshadowed by a sense of resolve, a realization that I owed this man nothing. "He made his choices, Ruth," Joyce said, her voice firm but laced with compassion, "and now he must face the consequences." Her words resonated deeply, a validation of the path I had chosen. Henry's downfall was not my burden to bear. It was the inevitable result of his own actions, a reckoning long overdue. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, I felt a profound shift within me. The shackles of Henry's control had been broken, and in their place, a newfound sense of freedom and purpose took root. I was no longer defined by the confines of my marriage, no longer bound by the expectations and limitations imposed upon me. I was Ruth Parker, a woman reborn, with a future as vast and limitless as the horizon stretching before me. And as I stood on the precipice of this new chapter, I felt a surge of exhilaration and gratitude. The road ahead would undoubtedly be paved with challenges, but for the first time in decades, I was ready to face them head-on, armed with the strength and resilience that had been forged in the fires of my oppression. Henry's reign was over, and a new era, my era, had begun. The months that followed my departure from Henry's life were a whirlwind of change and self-discovery. With Joyce's unwavering support, I navigated the legal intricacies of the divorce, ensuring that every step was taken to secure my independence and protect me from Henry's retaliation. It was during this time that I received an unexpected windfall, a sizable inheritance from Edna, left solely in my name. Her final act of defiance against her son's tyranny, a testament to the bond we had forged in her final days. "Use it wisely, my dear," her elegant script had urged. "Build the life you deserve, free from the shackles of my son's control." And so I did, channeling those funds into securing my own modest apartment, a cozy sanctuary where I could begin to rebuild the pieces of my shattered identity. But even as I reveled in my newfound freedom, the ghosts of my past lingered, whispering insidious doubts and fears. What if Henry refused to let me go? What if his thirst for control drove him to seek retribution? Those concerns were put to rest one fateful afternoon when a knock sounded at my door. I opened it to find Henry standing before me, a mere shadow of his former self. "Ruth," he rasped, his voice tinged with desperation. "Please, we need to talk." I steeled myself, determined not to let his pleas sway me from the path I had chosen. "There's nothing left to say, Henry," I replied, my tone firm but laced with a hint of pity. "The divorce is final. It's time for you to move on." His eyes widened, and for a moment I thought he might argue, might try to reassert the control he had once held over me. But then his shoulders slumped, and he nodded, a defeated man. "I never meant for it to go this far," he murmured, his gaze downcast. "I was a fool, Ruth, a fool who took the most precious thing in his life for granted." I said nothing, letting his words hang in the air between us, a bitter acknowledgement of the pain he had inflicted. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice barely audible, "for everything." And with that, he turned and walked away, disappearing from my life as abruptly as he had entered it all those years ago. In the weeks and months that followed, I focused on rebuilding the pieces of my life, one small step at a time. With the financial security of Edna's inheritance, I was able to pursue my long-dormant passion for teaching, securing a part-time position at the local community college. The first time I stepped into that classroom, a rush of emotions washed over me. Excitement, trepidation, and above all, a profound sense of purpose. This was where I belonged, shaping young minds and igniting their love for literature, just as I had done so many years ago. As I stood before those eager faces, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, the shackles of Henry's control finally falling away. I was no longer defined by the limitations he had imposed upon me. I was Ruth Parker, a woman reborn, with a future as vast and limitless as the horizon stretching before me. With each passing day, my confidence grew, nurtured by the support of my newfound community, colleagues who celebrated my passion, students who hung on my every word, and friends who had welcomed me back into their lives with open arms. And through it all, Joyce remained my steadfast ally, her unwavering belief in me a constant source of strength and inspiration. "Look at you, Ruth," she would say, her eyes shining with pride. "You've blossomed into the woman you were always meant to be." Her words resonated deeply, a validation of the long and arduous journey I had undertaken to reach this point. I had faced the depths of despair and emerged victorious, a phoenix rising from the ashes of my oppression. As the first anniversary of my newfound independence approached, I found myself reflecting on the woman I had been, the timid, broken creature who had allowed herself to be diminished by a man's cruelty. And in that moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, not just for the freedom I had claimed, but for the resilience that had carried me through the darkest of times. I was a survivor, a warrior who had stared down the demons of her past and emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever before. And as I looked towards the future, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, I would face them head-on, armed with the knowledge that I was the master of my own destiny. Henry's reign was over, and a new era, my era, had begun.